the day before the wedding. I accidentally saw my fiancé complaining to his brothers in the group. He said, "I'm so miserable. You guys have never seen how ugly she looks without legs crawling on the ground. Every time I see her prosthetic leg, I feel sick. I can't even touch her just because she saved my life. Do I have to marry her?" he complained. Several people in the group immediately advised him to run away from the wedding. His female friends were shouting the loudest in the group chat, "Hurry up and get out of it. Don't ruin half of your life just to repay her kindness. She's so selfish. This is moral blackmail," Ethan said. Okay, I felt terrible at that moment. My phone rang. A white-headed person sent a message. "Emily is the person I love the most. I am also the person Emily loves the most." Right, I froze. This sentence was said 10 years ago, my fiancé had said when he confessed his love to me. However, I didn't pay much attention to it. For some reason, I took it out on this person. Get lost. There's no such thing as true love in this world. Don't lie to her anymore. I didn't think much of it. I thought someone had sent the message by mistake. But soon, the white profile picture sent another message. "Emily, are you okay? Have I upset you again?" He sounded so humble and was very careful with his words. This made me feel even worse, because Ethan had behaved in the same way before, so I guessed the worst about the person. What's wrong? Did you lose a game of truth or dare? Or are you just unable to recognize the account of someone you like? There was a long silence on the other end, no reaction. Then a voice message came. "I understand that you're angry. That's why you pretended not to know me. But listen to me. I promise I'll keep my distance from Sarah in the future." This is Ethan speaking. 18-year-old Ethan. His voice is full of the pride and vitality of a teenager. Sarah is a female friend with whom he is particularly close. The female friend who persuaded him to run away from the wedding. Then, he sent a selfie of himself doing his homework and said, "I'll listen to you. I'm not going out with them. I'm studying." I took a breath. It really is 18-year-old Ethan. My thoughts suddenly went back to the past. Back then, he was just an ordinary boy, but I fell hopelessly in love with him at first sight. His grades were poor. He always hung out with a group of friends. One time, it was pouring rain. He insisted on skipping class to go find Sarah. Sarah was being harassed by debt collectors. He had to go protect her. I was worried about him, so I went out with him. The men who came to collect the debt were tall. They quickly knocked Ethan to the ground. They didn't think that was enough. They tried to run over his legs with their car. In the heat of the moment, I pushed him out of the way, but I got hit by the car instead. When I woke up, I saw Ethan crying so hard he couldn't breathe. He hugged me tightly, promising to love me forever and to take care of me. An 18-year-old boy. His tears were so hot. They burned my skin. I believed him. From then on, he was like a different person. He started to focus on his studies and stopped hanging out with his friends. Apart from studying, he spent all his time taking care of me, but because he had fallen so far behind, he still didn't do well in his exams. He decided to repeat the year and eventually got into a prestigious university. My parents slowly came to accept him too. My father even taught him how to run the company and introduced him to some useful contacts. The year he graduated, I handed over the company to him. A year later, my parents died in a car accident. I cried so much at the time. Ethan put his arms around me and said, "Don't worry, Emily, I'll always be there for you." From that day on, I became more and more inseparable from him. He was always very good to me, taking good care of me. But ever since Sarah came back, things have slowly become different. The phone screen is still constantly lit up. The boy kept professing his love for me. I couldn't take it anymore. I angrily replied to him, "Stop it. Your business is none of my business." He immediately replied, "Why you have to tell me what's wrong? Not long ago you said you fell in love with me at first sight. Why suddenly? Go away. Don't come near me." After sending this message, I was so emotionally unstable that Ethan pushed the door open. He stood above me, looking at me as if I were the most disgusting thing in the world. I completely lost it. I shouted at him. He just kept looking at me. When I had finished shouting, he noticed the phone on the bed. His eyes looked a little panicked. Then he laughed easily. "Emily, don't worry. The wedding will go ahead as planned. I promise to take care of you for the rest of your life." I was shaking all over. How can he be so righteous? After I exposed him, he can still put on a condescending look and condescendingly bestow his feelings on me. I struggled to get up. I grabbed the glass on the table and threw it at him. He didn't dodge. His forehead was immediately smashed and bleeding profusely. "Emily, How long are you going to keep this up? I have taken care of you for 10 years. I have always done my best. As the saying goes, a good son is absent from the bedside of a sick parent. Can't you let me vent a little? I was just about to continue. Suddenly, the door opened. Sarah walked in. She was wearing Ethan's white shirt. There were a few visible red marks on her neck. My eyes went dark. I stared at them. Ethan, how did you get hurt? Sarah hurried towards Ethan, panicked. She was about to burst into tears. Her eyes were full of concern. It's nothing, just a little injury. It's nothing. Ethan smiled at Sarah. He helped her straighten her clothes. His movements were natural and intimate. I watched this scene. My heart ached. Emily, what more do you want? Ethan has been good to you. He has taken care of you for 10 years. He has been burdened by you for 10 years. He has done enough. You not only have physical problems, you also have psychological problems. You have to drag everyone down with you. Sarah stood in front of Ethan. Crying, she shouted at me. She acted as if I were the big bad guy, the one who had bullied them. I couldn't help but look at Ethan. He never tried to stop Sarah. That was how he really felt. He was probably even grateful that Sarah had spoken for him. What irony. I, Emily, was a joke, from beginning to end. Ethan looked at me, crying and laughing at the same time. He looked crazy. He frowned. He pulled Sarah behind him. He's always on guard against me. Don't get worked up. Think about me. I've really suffered over the years. That's why I'm suffering. He's not suffering like I have. He's just a poor boy from an ordinary family. He's only managed to get to where he is today because of the capital left to him by my parents. He's enjoying the limelight now. Everyone's fawning over him. The only thing he regrets is having me as a burden. I can't help laughing. You're tired. I lost both my legs for you. I'll be in a wheelchair for the rest of my life. My parents handed over the company to you. You're the heir, and you dare say you're tired. The veins on Ethan's forehead bulge. That's enough. He hates it when people say things like that. He doesn't like it when people say he owes his success to my parents. Although, it's true, not long after I took over my parents' company, he changed the company name. He actually changed the company name to Ethan Group. This is really self-deceptive. At that time, he told me, because many people say that he is living off me. That's why he did it. I understand how he feels. I feel sad for him. Naturally, I won't argue with him. Ethan suddenly rushed over. He grabbed my collar. His expression was fierce. He said, I admit that I like Sarah now, but I never thought of giving you up. Next week's wedding will go ahead as planned. You don't need to worry at all. I will always take care of you until the end of our lives. At that moment, my phone rang again. I looked at the screen. It was a message from the 18-year-old Ethan. Emily, why haven't you replied to my messages? Are you in trouble? Seeing this message, tears fell from my eyes. I almost forgot. Back then, Ethan was all about me. But now he only feels responsible for me. I've become a burden to him. Ethan and Sarah have already left. I didn't even notice when they left. When I came to my senses, my phone kept receiving messages from Ethan, the 18-year-old. He kept asking, Emily, please reply. I'm really worried about you. Where are you now? Get lost. Didn't I tell you to get lost? I'm getting a bit annoyed. Emily, I'm sorry. But can you tell me where you are? I can't get in touch with you. I'm really worried. He was very insistent from his few words. I suddenly understood. At the time, Ethan happened to be climbing mountains with us during the winter vacation. At that time, I was angry with him for not breaking off contact with Sarah and ran away on my own. As a result, I unfortunately got lost in the mountains. At that time, I was only 18 years old. I was brave and stubborn. She cried all night on the mountain and didn't ask Ethan for help. Ethan looked for her all night without sleeping. Before dawn, he finally found her before the rescue team arrived. Since then, I have been deeply in love with him. I can't let go. Before, because he was lazy and unmotivated. When I was 18, I almost gave up on him. But after this incident, I like him even more. This makes my life both tragic and ridiculous. Then stop him. Don't let another Emily fall for Ethan. I immediately messaged Ethan back. You go down the mountain first. It's not safe up here. The rescue team is already looking. He was still stubborn. No, Emily, I can't leave you alone on the mountain. I'm a bit anxious. My fingers typed rapidly. I told you not to go. Can't you understand? If you come looking for me, I'll never forgive you. Emily, I really can't live without you. Please don't say that. 18-year-old Ethan was so desperate that he was on the verge of tears. His message was full of humility and panic. I gritted my teeth and continued to type, go find Sarah. Don't contact me again. I wish you both happiness. You're a perfect match. I hope God hears my prayer. and never let Ethan and Emily get back together. The screen lights up. 18-year-old Ethan quickly sends a message. No, it's not like that, Emily. I don't like Sarah. She's just a tomboy. I like you. I'll come over right away and explain everything. Not long ago. 28-year-old Ethan still kept saying he liked Sarah now. My vision fogs up again. Tears fall on my prosthesis, but I can't afford to feel sad. I quickly started typing. I must not let another Emily experience the same tragedy. Ethan, don't come looking for me again. If you dare, I'll jump off a mountain. After sending the message, I turned off my phone. I closed my eyes. My heart still ached. The pain of betrayal came like a tidal wave. I could hardly breathe. After a while, the screen of my phone lit up. I'll listen to you. Emily, don't be impulsive. I'll do whatever you say. You must be safe. I'll wait for you to come back. After I received this message, I just collapsed on the ground. I couldn't help crying. It was daybreak. It was already the next day. Nanny Emma found me sleeping on the ground all night. She quickly helped me up. Her eyes were full of pity. When she first entered the villa, she happened to see Ethan and Sarah interacting intimately in the living room. There were obvious red marks on both of their necks. Sarah looked like she had been spoiled all night. She looked particularly charming. This was not the first time Emma had encountered such a situation. Miss, let me help you up, Emma. Where is everyone else? I suppressed my dissatisfaction, trying to speak in a calm tone. Emma seemed to have something to say, but she didn't say it. I heard that they went to the hospital for a checkup. When I heard this, my mind buzzed. I was completely confused. That night, I was eating in the living room. Ethan helped Sarah walk in. Sarah leaned on his arms. Her hand gently touched her belly. It looked very tender. Emily, I have something to tell you. Ethan spoke first. I put down my chopsticks and bowl. I looked at him coldly. Ethan cleared his throat. He bowed his head and kissed Sarah. Sarah is pregnant. The baby is mine. I have to take care of them. Don't worry. I promised to marry you. I will do it. You will still be Mrs. Ethan. He said this with a calm tone. It's like talking about today's weather. I couldn't help but laugh. He is such a traitor. How dare he mention promises? Promises? What's the point of your promise? Didn't you also say you would love me forever? Ethan froze for a moment. Looking at me, he was at a loss for words. Sarah spoke unhappily from the side. Ethan hasn't abandoned you, and that's already pretty good. Look at what you've become. You're disabled in both legs. You can't even feed yourself or go to the bathroom by yourself. Ethan is still willing to marry you. You should be grateful. Ethan frowned. He said, Emily, stop it. After our wedding, Sarah and I will go abroad to live. She and I will get married abroad. She is also my wife. Don't bully her. After saying that, he helped Sarah walk away. At that moment, the white-headed avatar sent another message. Emily, can you send me a message back? I'm wondering how he sent the message to me 10 years later. Suddenly, I had an idea. It seems that every time 18-year-old Emily got angry and ignored him, his message would be sent to me, just as I was thinking. The message came again. You've been ignoring me since you got back from the mountains. Why are you angry? Didn't you tell me not to come looking for you? I sighed. I tapped the screen of my phone. Yes, I said not to come looking for me. Don't contact me again. The person on the other end of the line seemed to have been hit hard. Ethan was only 18. He had no idea what was going on. He had just had a few words with Sarah. Why was Emily ignoring him? Okay, I won't bother you anymore. But Emily, you must take care of yourself. Be happy. I couldn't help crying again. Last night I had a dream. In the dream, I met the 18-year-old Emily. I cried and begged her to stay away from Ethan. I stayed up all night talking to her. We talked about the past 10 years. At dawn, the 18-year-old girl was too emotional to speak. From that day on until the day of the wedding, 18-year-old Ethan never contacted me again. My messages fell on deaf ears. There was no response. On the day of the wedding, Sarah took advantage of the makeup artist's absence and pulled me out of the wheelchair with all her might. She squeezed my thigh hard. You good for nothing. You really want to marry Ethan? Sarah, are you crazy? I never really wanted to marry Ethan. I just wanted to show everyone today and show his true colors. I struggled as hard as I could, but I'm disabled. I can't compete with her. She's incredibly strong. She even pulled off my prosthetic leg. I had to get my phone out. I wanted to ask Emma for help. Just when I was at my wit's end, a black avatar appeared on my WeChat. My future self. Don't give up. I'm here to help. Suddenly, a strange light filled the room. Time stopped in the light. A figure in school uniform slowly became clear. It was me at the age of 18. She hugged me tightly, crying so hard she could hardly breathe. she said. "Don't worry, this time I won't do anything stupid." After that, she disappeared. What happened next was even more unbelievable. My legs suddenly felt numb and itchy. I looked down. There were suddenly 2 legs in my originally empty skirt. At the same time, Ethan in the other room was complaining about me to his friends. But then there was a muffled grunt. He suddenly levitated and fell to the ground. His legs had suddenly disappeared. I could hear his angry yelling from the powder room. Sarah, who had just been wrestling with me, had also suddenly disappeared. I was alone in the powder room. I immediately grabbed my phone. I stared at the suddenly appeared all-black avatar. You see, 18-year-old Ethan has always used a white profile picture. Emily is 18, her profile picture is black. The black profile picture flashes again. I click on it. It's a message from her. We've finally made it. It's cause for celebration. What the hell happened? My hands are shaking so much I can't even type properly. Last night I had a dream. I dreamt of myself 10 years from now. She desperately warned me to stay away from Ethan. She said a lot of things. It made my whole body shiver. I froze for a moment. Wasn't this the scene I had dreamed about last week? I thought it was just a dream. But the next day I had the same dream again. In that dream, I saw it. I saw those 10 years. That day, Ethan skipped school to go to Sarah's. I didn't follow. Later, Ethan lost both his legs after saying goodbye to my 18-year-old Emily. I stood up. I stood in front of the mirror. The skirt of the wedding dress spread out like a cloud. I stared at the legs beneath it. I couldn't take my eyes off them. I was both surprised and delighted to have my legs back. I almost couldn't stand up straight. Suddenly, there was a loud noise outside the door. I opened it. I found Ethan furiously pounding on his prosthetic legs. The people around him were full of fear. They looked at him in confusion. His brothers stood by at a loss. They all stared at him like he was crazy. Where are my legs? Why are my legs gone? Ethan completely lost it. Suddenly, he realized that he had no legs. The people around him told him with a serious and sympathetic face. In fact, he had lost his legs 10 years ago. This is what some of his best friends had told him. Over the past 10 years, his glory seemed to be just a dream. This shouldn't be. The person without legs is not him at all. His face showed both anger and fear. He looked very intimidating. I stood silently by his side. Watching him lose control, I felt an indescribable sense of relief. "Ethan, stop it." My tone was cold. Ethan suddenly turned his head at that moment. A gust of wind blew. My skirt was blown up, revealing my intact legs. At that moment, time seemed to have stopped. Ethan froze for a long time. He wanted to rush over to me, but forgot that he had lost his legs. He fell to the ground and could only crawl away like an ugly worm. "Emily, it was you. You did this, didn't you? What have you done?" I frowned and looked down at him. "You know, the way you crawl on the ground without legs is especially ugly." I returned the words he had said to me. He froze for a moment. Ethan also remembered the words he had spoken. The arrow he had shot now pierced his own heart. Ethan vomited a mouthful of blood. The hope in his eyes had completely disappeared. "This can't be. I must be dreaming. I am the president of Ethan Group. How could I lose both my legs?" He shouted. "In this life, he is not the president of Ethan Group. The president of Ethan Group does not exist at all." Suddenly, he felt a sharp pain in his head. I suddenly had an extra memory. After 18-year-old Emily had those dreams, she left Ethan. After losing his legs, Ethan spent every day in a daze. He had to drop out of high school before he finished. Without the help of my parents and without a degree, he lost his support in life. He could only struggle at the bottom of society. Now he works as a picker. In this life, I studied hard. I did well at school and at work. My parents are safe. Because I stopped that car accident, I agreed to marry Ethan, purely out of hatred. Although I didn't really experience these things. 10 years ago, I did come to a wedding. I saw for myself how miserable it was to lose both legs, so I agreed to Ethan's proposal, just so I could completely ruin him today. More and more guests slowly gathered. They stare at Ethan, their eyes full of doubt in everyone's impression. Ethan has always been a person with limited mobility. He lives in a small rented room of less than 30 square meters. He is obviously poor, but he says he is the president. Is he delusional? Calm down. One of his brothers tries to help him up, but Ethan pushes him away violently, shouting, go away, all of you." He has a breakdown, completely out of control. He shouted, "I'm not crazy. You're the ones who are crazy." The wedding went ahead as planned. The atmosphere was lively. Everyone was talking and laughing. Everyone was in a happy mood. Ethan was sitting in a wheelchair. He looked different. He looked at me with mixed feelings, not just hatred. I understood. He remembered 2 lifetimes just like me. Before stepping onto the red carpet, Ethan took my hand. He asked, "Emily, is this why you suddenly stopped loving me? You knew 10 years ago." Yes, after that, I slowly walked down the aisle. Ethan was being pushed onto the stage. He kept staring at me, his eyes full of resignation and pleading. He probably guessed what I was going to do. When I reached the stage, the MC asked me with a smile, "Bride, do you love the groom, and do you want to spend the rest of your life with him?" Everyone stopped talking. Everyone stared at me. Ethan clenched his fists. His eyes immediately reddened. He said, "I don't love him, and I don't want to marry him." I replied. My voice clearly reached every corner of the venue. All of a sudden, the whole place exploded. The guests began to whisper. The discussion came in waves. I smiled and said, "Today I'm going to call off this wedding." I looked at Ethan with a cold stare. He shook his head. His eyes were full of pleading. "Emily, don't do this." His voice was a little hoarse because he was so excited. The atmosphere suddenly became a little strange. Everyone was stunned. The scene in front of them was so dramatic. The heiress of Smith Group actually married an ordinary person. This was already strange enough. What was even stranger was that the parents of the Smith family didn't even come to the wedding. Everyone felt that they must not have approved of their daughter marrying a poor boy. Only I knew the truth, because I had told my parents beforehand. I had planned this wedding to get back at Ethan. My parents didn't need to be involved. Thinking about them made my eyes well up. In those vague memories, I had seen my parents many times over the past 10 years. But to me, I had already lost them once. The guests' gazes shifted back and forth between Ethan and me. Ethan's mother was the first to come back to her senses. She suddenly stood up from her seat. She never looked at me with any favor. She felt that a disabled person like me was not worthy of her son. On the day of the wedding in my previous life, she openly said that she would disown me as her daughter-in-law. This time, she actually came. Unlike her previous condescending attitude, Ethan's mother now looked humble. She also looked a little overwhelmed. "Emily, did Ethan do something wrong? I'll teach him a lesson for you, but you can't be so impulsive." Her tone was urgent. She wanted to quickly control the situation. I looked at her. My eyes were full of ridicule. "Auntie, you think your son, who has lost both his legs, is worthy of being my husband?" Ethan's mother suddenly turned pale. She stopped in front of the stage, looking at me in surprise. Ethan kept hugging his head, sometimes furious and in pain. "Everyone, I'm sorry to make you laugh." I picked up the microphone and said loudly, "I had a reason for canceling the wedding. Ethan had betrayed me long ago." Once this was said, everyone was stunned. Yes, in this life, Ethan was still involved with Sarah. He had been pursuing me passionately for many years and kept professing his love to me. But this did not prevent him from maintaining an ambiguous relationship with Sarah. On the day I agreed to marry him, I learned that Sarah was pregnant. Ethan's face instantly turned pale. He looked at me helplessly. The veins on his forehead were bulging. I continued. 1 week before the wedding, I found out that he was having an ambiguous relationship with a girl named Sarah, and she was pregnant. How could I possibly be willing to marry him? As soon as this sentence was uttered, the whole audience once again erupted. No one expected it. After Ethan got together with the Smith family's daughter, not only did he not cherish her, he even dared to cheat on her. Everyone looked at him with disdain. Ethan's best friends also lowered their heads, feeling particularly embarrassed. They wished they could find a place to hide. They knew Ethan had cheated on them. They had been trying to matchmake Ethan and Sarah. Sarah had never given up on Ethan either. Even though Ethan had become disabled and depraved, Ethan's mother still stood there frozen. She used to like Sarah a lot. After learning that I had accepted Ethan's advances, she didn't want her son to see Sarah anymore. A woman from an ordinary family can't compare to the daughter of the Smith family. "Ethan, I told you to stay away from her." Ethan's mother's voice was particularly harsh. The wealth that was about to come her way was just gone. Of course, she was furious. Ethan, however, kept his head down. His eyes looked very complicated. At that moment, Ethan's mother suddenly ran to a corner. She stood in front of a woman wearing a mask and a hat. She hit and kicked her. "I told you not to go near my son, didn't I? Why didn't you listen?" In the struggle, the woman's mask fell off. It turned out to be Sarah. She covered her stomach with her hands and shouted, "Auntie, stop it. I didn't seduce Ethan. He did it of his own free will. Ethan told me he loves me. He just can't let go of Emily." As soon as he said this, the room fell silent. Then the discussion got louder. Someone said to Ethan, "Ethan, you're so sneaky. You're always sneaky. When I speak, every word is cold as ice." Ethan stiffened his neck and raised his head. His eyes were both confused and helpless. He gasped for breath and said, "Emily, I'm confused. I shouldn't be like this. I don't understand why I couldn't refuse Sarah, but I do love you in the end." His voice trailed off. In the end, he could only lower his head in resignation. He looked very frustrated and desperate. Ethan's mother also stopped scolding Sarah. She shook her head and cried, mumbling, "It's over. It's all over. My good life. It's all gone." I looked around, smiled slightly. "Everyone, sorry to keep you waiting so long. I'll refund the gifts later. The wedding has been changed to my celebration dinner. Everyone continue eating. I'm done." Smiled and turned to leave. Emily shouted, "Don't go, come back." Ethan hurriedly pushed the wheelchair to try to catch up with me, but he was in too much of a hurry. The wheelchair tilted. He fell heavily to the ground. I didn't stop. I left the party quickly when I arrived home. My parents were already waiting for me. I ran to them in tears. "Mom and Dad, I've missed you so much." Mom hugged me tightly, patting my back gently, comforting me with soft words. That long-lost warmth surrounded me again, dispelling the coldness in me. Dad looked at me with concern and comforted me softly. "Don't cry, my dear daughter. He doesn't deserve you," with the comfort of my parents. My mood slowly improved. In the days that followed, I officially started working in the company in this life. Ever since graduating from university, I have insisted that my parents bring me into the company to learn the business. After graduating, with my accumulated experience and hard work, I successfully took on several major projects. Since then, my parents have been able to rest assured and leave the company in my hands. I thought after the wedding incident, Ethan would never come looking for me again. I never thought he would show up again. Ethan was in a wheelchair. His mother was pushing him from behind. His face was haggard. His expression was full of guilt and loss. "Emily, let's talk." As soon as Ethan saw me, he hurriedly said. Ethan's mother kept nodding her head next to him. She was especially polite to me. Her attitude was very respectful. "Emily, don't worry. I will never let that kind of woman into Ethan's home. As for the child, I will find a way to get rid of it. Just forgive Ethan this time." I didn't call the security guard to have them thrown out. Ethan's mother sensibly went out first, leaving the two of us in the room. "Ethan, you remember too, don't you? In that case, what right do you have to ask me to forgive you?" I stared coldly at Ethan. His face was taut. He wanted to say something, but all that came out was a hoarse sound in his throat. He clearly remembered everything that had happened in both lives. Sometimes he couldn't tell whether he was the Ethan with 2 legs or the Ethan without. But no matter which Ethan it was, he didn't want to leave Emily. "Emily, I know I've done a lot of wrong, but can you give me another chance, at least in this life?" I didn't. It wasn't as bad as it used to be. I shook my head. I sneered. That's because the 18-year-old Emily was willing to listen. If 18-year-old Emily hadn't taken that dream to heart, I would still be going down the same path. I crossed my arms. Standing on high ground, I looked down at him. "You're always entangled with Sarah. It's really infuriating. Then you might as well just be with her." Ethan's expression changed. He looked very pained and conflicted. He said, "No, I love you. I'm with her. I'm just confused by her." I shook my head in this regard. Ethan is no match for Sarah. Sarah is very loyal in love. Even if Ethan lost both his legs in this life, she still loves him. But Ethan, no matter what the circumstances, is always greedy. He wants the pot while still eating from the bowl. This completely dashed Ethan's hopes. "Emily, trust me, okay? I owed you in my previous life. I'll pay you back in this life. I'll make it up to you." I shook my head slightly. Then I called the security guards to take them out. Ethan's body was still shaking as the security guards pushed him away. He seemed to want to say something, but in the end, he just looked at me, without saying a word. Afterwards, I heard that Ethan and Sarah got married after all. On the day of the wedding, Sarah's belly was already very obvious, since Ethan couldn't afford it. Sarah even prepared the money for the wedding herself. Sarah really is a complete Ethan supremacist. Even though Ethan was poor and disabled, she still decided to marry him without hesitation. I've seen the video of their wedding. Ethan wore a long face from beginning to end. Sarah was pregnant, wearing a red wedding dress, with a happy smile on her face. On the stage, she told the story of herself and Ethan. She said that they had grown up together and had been together for more than 20 years. She also said, Ethan had been especially good to her. He even lost both his legs trying to save her. Her words won the applause and cheers of many people. If I hadn't experienced something in my past life, I might have been moved too. Past life. I lost both my legs because of Sarah and Ethan. Ethan said, "I didn't ask you to save me." Sarah also said, "You're meddling in other people's business. Even if it weren't for you, Ethan would have been fine. You did this so that Ethan would only marry you." I thought from now on, I would have nothing more to do with them. I never thought that those two would cause trouble again. It turned out that during an argument, Sarah was pushed over by Ethan. She lost the baby. Moreover, due to her severe injuries, the doctor had to remove her uterus. Since then, Sarah's life in Ethan's family has become even more difficult. At first, Ethan's mother had accepted the reality, but when she saw that Sarah could not bear children, Ethan's mother changed her mind. She made trouble for Sarah every day. She mocked her, calling her a rooster that couldn't lay eggs. Ethan was no slouch. Even though he was disabled, his old habits of womanizing hadn't changed. He even got involved with a receptionist at the hotel. It was said that the receptionist looked quite like me. What bad luck. The receptionist got pregnant by him. She came every day to make trouble. In the end, Sarah pushed her down. The baby was also lost. I saw Sarah again. She looked completely different now. In the past, Ethan had always taken good care of her. She was always so pretty, so delicate. But now she looked 10 years older. I almost didn't recognize her. Sarah looked terrible. Her hair was dry. She was wearing a crumpled jacket. She looked at me with jealous, resentful eyes at me like this. "Are you happy now?" I shake my head indifferently. "You're wrong. What you think doesn't matter to me. I don't care." Haha, that's ridiculous. I'm ridiculous. Sarah is crying and laughing. She makes me a little dazed, the one in front of me, just like me in the past. Crazy and unconvinced. Sarah cries loudly. The crying doesn't stop. I'm not willing to accept it. I've done so much for him. Both my parents advised me not to marry Ethan, but I refused. I love him. "Coco, he only has eyes for you." I lowered my eyes. In fact, Ethan doesn't love anyone. No matter who is by his side, they will all get hurt. After I returned, I heard that Sarah and Ethan got divorced. After the divorce, Sarah was like a lost soul. She was completely broken. Her hair was messy every day. She kept muttering, saying that she was about to become the wife of the president of Ethan Group. She also said that Ethan loved her and the children very much. The last time I heard about Sarah, she was admitted to a psychiatric hospital. The doctor said that she had suffered too much shock. She had developed a delusion. She could no longer distinguish between reality and dreams. Only I understood. She was just remembering the past. Ethan's life was not easy either. His mother sighed every day. She always blamed him for not being able to let her enjoy a comfortable life. In order to live a comfortable life, his mother even introduced him to a rich woman who liked disabled people. I've met that rich lady. Her last name is Johnson. She's very big. She has a lot of flesh on her face. She also likes to hang out with young, good-looking guys. Everyone calls her the fresh meat juicer. The thing is, she really likes people with disabilities. So Ethan quickly became her favorite. That day, Mrs. Johnson and I were talking business. Ethan was wheeled up by the maid. He was still skinny as a rail. His eyes were sunken. His body was covered in bruises of a purple hue. The moment he saw me, his whole body trembled. His eyes went from vacant to completely blank. Mrs. Johnson beckoned to him. She told him to come over. She even gloated to me. "Mrs. Johnson, look at him. I just love his sickly appearance." I forced myself to ignore the discomfort I felt. I glanced at Ethan. He still hung his head. His body trembled slightly. Mrs. Johnson saw that I wasn't interested in talking about Ethan. I felt bored, so I continued talking business with her. But she still reached out and touched Ethan's face from time to time. Ethan was so tormented by her. The lower he buried his head. After we finished talking business, I stood up and was about to leave. As I passed by, Ethan suddenly raised his hand. In a small and desperate voice, he said, "Emily, take me with you." I stopped in my tracks. I looked down at his empty trouser legs. At that moment, I was a little confused. It seemed to me that I saw an 18-year-old Ethan blushing and saying to me, "Emily is the person I love most in the world." I closed my eyes and said, "Mrs. Johnson, I want to take him with me." Ethan suddenly looked up at me, his eyes red. Although Mrs. Johnson was a little surprised, she didn't say no. After saying goodbye to Mrs. Johnson, I asked the driver to take Ethan home. Before getting in the car, Ethan looked back at me. He suddenly smiled easily. That smile seemed to release all the pressure and regret. It also seemed like a final farewell. A few days later, I learned that Ethan had committed suicide. My heart suddenly trembled. I never thought he would go down this path. My parents asked me if I wanted to attend his funeral. I refused. There was no need to go. Things ended here. All the grudges were over. 2 years later, I happened to see an email. It was a message sent by Ethan before he committed suicide. Emily, I'm sorry, I'm in so much pain. The past haunts me like a nightmare. Only death can set me free. Mrs. Johnson's torment, maybe it's my punishment. I thought I would die at her hands, but you brought me back. My Emily is still so kind. Goodbye, Emily. If I could do it all over again, I promise I won't bother you anymore. After reading this email, I turned off the computer. The sunlight outside the window was blinding. I took a deep breath. I walked out of the bedroom. The living room was filled with the aroma of food. My daughter, come and eat. Coming, Dad seemed to sense that I was troubled. He came over. He patted my shoulder and said, "Don't think so much. Let bygones be bygones." I nodded with a smile. My heart slowly calmed down. All the past grievances and hatred slowly faded away. I lived a peaceful and beautiful life. On WeChat, the accounts with the 2 black and white avatars also completely disappeared. I can never find them again.